everybody, welcome to another edition of my house art tour. So this time I have a poem and a sketch of a painting that I'm planning to go with the poem, and also I have an idea. And my idea is that, well, I'll come to the idea later, but anyway, so to begin with, okay, so I've been thinking about what my skills are, and I kind of have the skills of someone who, if they were born 2,000 years ago, and probably not a woman, I would be pretty well off, because I'm pretty good with like things that are, are pretty archaic. But anyway, like poetry, and like numerology and stuff. So I guess I've got a lot of talents in those areas. I was thinking about sort of that, and sort of digging into that idea. And anyway, so I wanted to write a poem about that, sort of. And so I was planning a picture that would kind of talk about or explore the idea of skill sets and how a skill set fits into a normal life, like my life specifically, and that kind of thing. So, like I think largely in a sort of way, a poet is an old-timey entertainer, sort of. Like an old-timey performer, kind of. Like instead of having a movie, you would have Homer standing there talking to you, and Homer would recite one of his hit poems, one of them being the Iliad, and another one being the Odyssey. And he was just a great performer. And in ancient times, you would listen to an orator speak. And an orator, like Cicero, they could go on forever. They could speak for 4 or 5 or 6 hours. And there are some people in the world, like world leaders, who have been known to have speeches that last all day long. So I don't think that there's a coincidence that I'm really interested in movie script writing and poetry and making videos and things. Like that kind of presentation is a little bit archaic, but I think it's like the poetry art presentation is a little archaic, but I think it's pre-theater. And so, and if you were in those, okay. So one of the groups that I follow on Facebook, and I seem to follow a lot of groups on Facebook, but one of the groups I follow is a Greek astrological group. which is an interesting thing to look at, because when you're hearing, all you see is the translations anyway. They just translate into English. So when you're looking at that, they're not talking about like Jupiter and Saturn and, you know, they're talking about Zeus and Uranus and Hephaestus. Like they're speaking a mythological, a classical language of mythology, because that's what they were talking about. So when the poet Homer is talking about the Trojan War, he's describing something that you can look up in the stars and see evidence of, or the players, because you can see Zeus in the sky, who is Jupiter, basically. You can see Venus in the sky. You can see all the mythological characters in the sky. And the ones that I'm going to be talking about today are Castor and Pollux, which are kind of related to the Iliad story. So the Iliad is a story of basically, okay, so there's an apple, and there are three goddesses, and the three goddesses are Athena, Venus, and Hera, I want to say. And there's a beauty contest, and they want to know who's the most beautiful of the three. So they ask Paris to give his apple that he has to the goddess who's the most beautiful one, and he gives the apple to Venus. So that's not surprising, because she's the goddess of beauty and love. So anyway, Venus has bribed him before this, where she said that she will give him the gift of somebody else's wife, Helen of Troy, famous beauty herself. So Helen of Troy, reputedly one of the most beautiful women in the world, was married to Menelaus, who was a king. And so because she got this apple from Paris, Venus decided to be good on her word and give Paris Helen of Troy. And so Helen of Troy is abducted by Paris, basically, and he takes off with her across the border from Greece to modern-day Turkey. And that starts the Trojan War. So Helen of Troy was semi-divine because she was Zeus's daughter from Leda. And that's kind of a strange story. Okay, but there were there were 4 siblings who were born from that birthing process. There was Helen of Troy and her sister, her half-sister, Clytemnestra, and Helen of Troy's brother by Zeus and Leda, whose name was Polydeuces, who is now a moon of Saturn, but also known as Pollux, and Castor, and the sister Clytemnestra is Castor's full sister. And Castor is the half-brother of Pollux. So you have these 4 beings who are all pregnant, or they're all inside of Leda. And Leda's the mother of all of them. But 2 of them are children of Zeus, and 2 of them are children of Tyndareus, who is the king of Sparta. So this is an example of what's called superfecundation. Hold on, I'll find it. It's heteropaternal superfecundation. So heteropaternal superfecundation is a real word, real thing, and it's what happens when you have a fraternal, so when your uterus releases 2 eggs at once, you can have identical twins, or you can have fraternal twins. And when an egg splits in 2, you can have identical twins. And so this is a special circumstance where there are 2 eggs released, which would normally make fraternal twins, but both of those eggs split in 2 to make 2 sets of identical twins. So Leda was pregnant with 2 sets of twins who were both supposed to be identical, but they were brother and sister each case. But they were also, the 2 eggs were released. One of them was fertilized by one father, and the other one was fertilized by another father, which is heteropaternal superfecundation, which is something that happens from time to time in real life, not just in poems. So, and sometimes, in order to clarify this whole thing, Leda is, they just come out of an egg where there's no mother. But anyway, I don't see why. But anyway, I guess to make it more simple. So the twins in Gemini are traditionally Castor and Pollux. Castor is on the left-hand side, Pollux is on the right-hand side. And they look kind of like that, with the different stars. This is Castor, and this is Pollux. But, I mean, because there were women there also born, you could say, one of them could be Clytemnestra, and the other one could be Helen of Troy. So, Castor and Pollux, yeah, you could do that. You could also do Clytemnestra and Helen of Troy. So, Clytemnestra, Okay, so Menelaus and Agamemnon were kings. They were in exile from their land somehow in Sparta when Helen of Troy and Clytemnestra came of age, and Menelaus married Helen of Troy, who was one of the most beautiful people in the world, and are women, and Clytemnestra was married to Agamemnon. But Agamemnon, I mean, she was already married. So Agamemnon had to kill her husband, whose name escapes me. And also, I mean, there was a whole family that was destroyed in that marriage. So that was bad. It gets worse. I might not go into everything because, I mean, you have to read the Iliad, I guess. But it gets worse. Like, so Agamemnon's not a super great guy. And he does some pretty nasty stuff to Clytemnestra, so that when he comes home from the war, she's already found somebody else she likes better, and they kill him, I think. Memory serves me correctly. But anyway, okay, so these two twins. So there's a long story. There's stories about all of them. So Clytemnestra and Helen of Troy don't really appear in the sky, except that I guess, I mean, they could be stand-ins here for Gemini. So the reason we're talking about Gemini today is because of my astrological chart. Everyone has one. And so your astrological chart is basically where the stars are. And to learn about your chart is sort of an education in astronomy, in a way, if you do it sort of sidereally, which I like to do it. I mean, I like star charts. And so, anyway, pretend this is the universe. But it's the universe from the outside of this is a globe that I have that's been painted with chalk paint so that I can draw on it. But what it really depicts is the universe outside of the globe, like that. So I've taken the universe and glommed it onto this globe. So everybody has something kind of like this. So this is their horizon. So you can see this is the visible sky, and this is the invisible sky. And so if you're an astrologer, for convenience sake and for other purposes, you divide the zodiacal track. Okay, so the zodiacal track, different for everybody, sort of placed around the globe like a little, not a belt because it doesn't fit all the way around, but kind of like a hat. So mine happens to be here, where the highest point in my sky is in the south, and the lowest point of my sky is in the north. So, and the track kind of, like if my house was the universe, the track kind of goes from my upper sort of the floor, kind of dividing an upstairs and a downstairs from my bedroom into my kitchen, like this. And the upper part is visible. And my upper part has things like Uranus, the planet of weirdness, and Pluto, the planet of death, and then the poet planet, which is a little planetoid, which is Sappho. So it's really high in my sky. And what else is up there? So my highest points have these really strange little characters in them. Pluto, Uranus, Sappho. So that's kind of sort of the showcase of my sky. And some people have very normal planets up there. But anyway, so you have these 3 planets, and they're in the south. So there's a very big south-north thing going on. And okay, so everyone's is different. Some people, their track goes like straight east to west. Sometimes there's, like because we're always moving through the universe, the zodiacal track is, and I guess that's moving too, like everything's kind of moving. And it's just a kind of accident of the snapshot of your birth, which way is east and west. That's to do with our own situation here. But anyway, how it all fits together. So you've got the horizon line here. And so on the horizon is your ascendant. So the zodiacal track is important because that's where all the planets in the solar system are kind of proceeding. There are no planets in most of the constellations because they're flattened out to a ring around, like the planets are moving in kind of like a procession in a very thin, narrow band around the universe, and that's where the planets are. So you won't find planets in, for instance, well, you will find some planetoids in strange places. They can have erratic orbits because they're, I don't know, I think it's because they haven't, maybe they're newer, maybe they're new, and their orbits are still erratic, whereas maybe the older planets, they've settled into sort of a standard orbit. Like Pallas has a really strange orbit, really eccentric, kind of ovoid, I think. Anyway, so you'll find some of the smaller things, and there are lots of little planets in the solar system, planetoids. And so the reason that Pluto was demoted from being a planet to a planetoid is because the mass, like there are lots of little planetoids in the solar system, but the mass of one of the planetoids was found to be greater than the mass of Pluto. Its size isn't greater, but the mass is greater. So in order for them to kind of be fair, they would have to admit that there are all these planetoids in the solar system, but they don't do that because that would be complicated to explain, so they just demoted Pluto to being a planetoid. So yes, so there are lots of little asteroids in the zodiacal track floating around with the planets in their orbits. So the ascendant is where the zodiacal track kind of rises up, and the planets are moving along in a procession along the zodiacal track, starting with the ascendant on your horizon, closest to, well, wherever it is that your ascendant is. Mine happens to have been in the southeast where I was born, and my ascendant is in Scorpio. So there's the claws of Scorpio are coming up over the ascendant. So, and there's and so they fly over the sky, and the highest point is the medium CLA, which is, so that's the highest point a planet can be above the Earth in the zodiacal track. And that's, the medium CLA is the highest point in your sky, the highest point in the zodiacal track. And mine happens to have Uranus, Pluto, and Sappho in it. And then another point that's important is where the zodiacal track, or all the planets, descend again, like fall under the horizon. And that, in my case, is here. So the planets are rising into the descendant, and then are rising from the ascendant into the descendant eventually through the medium CLA, MC, also known as the midheaven. So the descendant is what we're talking about today, and that is where Gemini is. And in my descendant, I have Gemini. So the descendant, the horizon would be kind of there. And on sort of flanking the descendant are two of my planets, which are this little football guy who is Venus, and this little kind of hip purse, which is Saturn, when I was born. So these two fellows. So this is traditionally Castor and Pollux. I'd like to kind of reinterpret it. This is the painting that I'm kind of thinking of. I'd like to reinterpret it as maybe a couple of female figures, since I'm a female person. Maybe Clytemnestra and her sister Helen of Troy. So I'm planning this painting based on the poem that I'm writing, or that I wrote, and I haven't quite. Okay, so you can see the plan here. So this is the twins, and this is. It's funny how it looks like they're playing football, because Castor and Pollux are like they were immortalized. One of them was mortal. One of them was immortal. Zeus allowed Pollux, his son, to make Castor immortal too, because they really liked being together, and so they were immortalized in the sky as Gemini. And that's how you get immortalized, is you get put in the sky so that you can kind of be part of the story. And they were sportsmen, and they were horse people, because you also had kind of around this neighborhood is interesting. You've got the dogs, Canis Minor and Canis Major are here. You've got in between Canis Major and Canis Minor are Monoceros, the unicorn. And you've got a lot of animals around. You've got Taurus here, the bull. You've got, and then you have the hunter Orion, who's one of the most visible and recognizable constellations in the sky, that's right here. And you have the lynx, which is kind of here. And that's because of the hunter Orion's threat to eradicate all animals by hunting them down and killing them. And so he has a lot of animals around him. And in the, okay, angry animals probably. They don't want to be. Anyway, so sportsmen. They were sportsmen, but they were also ship. Like, they also had the ability to guide people who were shipwrecked. And ships are really big for Gemini. So I have 3 ships here. And these are the gates of the ascendant, or the descendant, as the zodiacal track sort of falls through under the horizon. And then I have some trees here, and then I have lightning striking because their symbol is what's called St. Elmo's fire, also known as witchfire. And so there's a lot of lightning here. And these gates are kind of like wrought iron gates in the picture that I want to do. And so I have this sort of upside down thing going on because the zodiacal track is moving through, but also because it's sort of a topsy-turvy area because of like it's got because of the placement in the sky. It's sort of you'd think it would be about kind of service-oriented things because it's traditionally the place where you learn about service and where you are of service to other people. But mine is a kind of topsy-turvy thing because the service that I am greatest to others is a very fiery thing. So there's a lot of fire here, but because I was born at midnight, the fire is sort of lightning, and it was a gloomy day. It was a kind of foggy, misty, gloomy day. So I've drawn lightning, and so it's this feeling of illumination, like it's broad daylight, but it's lightning, and it's this St. Elmo's fire, witch fire. And so St. Elmo is interesting because he was a saint. A lot of bad things happened to him, as usual. Martyrs, they have this terrible story. But he, coincidentally, also had the ability to guide sailors and the shipwrecked. So he has something in common. St. Elmo, or St. Erasmus of Formia, has the same kind of mystical powers as the Gemini twins in a sort of Catholic sense. So if you were shipwrecked, then you would talk to Erasmus, St. Erasmus. But anyway, so there are the ships, and they're also they've got a lot of stuff going on with them. Okay, so all right, and so there's a neat triangle in my chart, and where I come from, people are really interested in triangles. Triangulation, symmetry is really big. So what I have from my descendant is okay, so if you are going to take the wheel of the sky, or the zodiacal track, and divide it into 7s and make a 7-sided polygon, where you are in the center, where you were born, and the 7 sides are all around you. So there maybe there's a planet in each of those 7 points. Each of those 7 points would be based on a system of 7s called triseptiles, or septiles, basically. which are 51 degrees, because if you divide 360, a circle, into 7, you get something like 51 degrees. So if you have planets in equidistant all around, like in sevens, which would be a perfect song where I come from. And no, maybe some people have that. Most people don't. But if you have that, then you'd have a perfectly symmetrical sort of 7-sided figure where all of these zodiacal bodies are pulling or kind of entrancing you in a completely perfect 7-pointed equidistant beautifulness of beauty. But most people don't have that. Most people have some what's called septiles in their chart. I happen to have a lot of septiles in my chart. And so I have a septile, or septiles come with biseptials and triseptiles. So a septile is 51 degrees. A biseptile is 102 degrees, which is 2 septiles. And a triseptile is 154 degrees. So I have in my descendant, if you, like, the descendant is its own little point, just like the ascendant is. And they're directly across from each other in what's called an opposition. They're 180 degrees apart always. And so my highest point in my chart, which has the poet planetoid Sappho, is 102 degrees from my descendant. And on the opposite side, I have a corresponding biseptile connection to another planetoid called Pallas. And they are connected by a triseptile, 154 degree angle, which forms a triangle, which is what we love. So from my descendant, which is this place where you would think that service-oriented things would come from. So, and Athena, Pallas is reference to Pallas Athena, who is a goddess, and she shows up in the Iliad a lot because she just, or no, in the Odyssey a lot. Well, in the Iliad too, but she's in the Odyssey where you kind of see her real personality because she shows up. Well, she's in a lot of stuff. She's famously at the end of the Orestean trilogy, where she comes down in the Deus Ex Machina, and she adjudicates the Orestean trilogy in a very flippant manner. She's kind of a funny character. She's the goddess of justice, and wisdom. Wisdom, war, justice. But she's kind of a ham, I think, in a way. But she has her favorite people. And she shows up to bring people home from the Trojan War. She really likes Odysseus of the Odyssey. And she shows up in disguise, usually, to give people advice. And she shows up to Odysseus' son, whose name is escaping me. It'll come to me. Anyway, so Athena is there in the sky. So you can see how if you're into the stars at that time, you've got these stories, You're writing poetry about the stars, basically. So it's these two things kind of go together like they do in my astrological chart. So anyway, I guess I could read the poem now. There's just another couple of things that I wanted to say. Okay, so I was looking for the technical name for lightning, and the name for lightning is triboelectrification, the process of thunder and lightning. Tribo means, and I've never kind of seen this prefix before, tribo, and tribo means friction, and so it's friction-oriented electrification because of the friction that creates lightning and thunder. So the first part of the poem, I'm just talking kind of around that word, triboelectrification. I'm talking about boats because it sounds like tri-boat. So I talk around triboelectrification. So the boats I have here are because of the St. Elmo's fire and the shipwrecks and Castor and Pollux and St. Elmo's fire, but also I'm kind of tying that into the word triboelectrification, which is the technical name for thunder and lightning. And okay, and I mentioned Xinjiang, which is a Chinese city that is equidistant from the 0 degrees longitude as Kingston is, where I was born. So it's one of the towns that's on this longitude line opposite to where I am, so that if China, like I don't think China has the same time system that we follow, but because I think that their whole thing is just the same time all the time. But if they were following that, then Xinjiang would be one of the cities that would be at high noon when I was born, which was at midnight. And St. Elmo's fire is green, yellow, blue, plasmic effect. And so I kind of want to, in this picture, maybe have some a St. Elmo's fire coming off the gates. You can see it coming off of ships sometimes, like it's this thing, it's like a plasmic effect that lights up something with electricity, like, and it sometimes comes right before a lightning strike. So I'm going to incorporate that into my picture. And okay. So the patron of sailors. Oh, they are associated with horsemanship because of Monoceros, who is here, the unicorn, who is in the middle of the 2 dogs. So it's also that they're associated with dogs and horses and sports. And they were actually a pretty big deal, the Gemini twins. They have shrines and temples in Athens and Echion and Rome. And all 4 siblings were important to Sparta. They were said to have grown up in Sparta, which is a very strange place, mythologically, legendarily, archaically, because it was like a very warlike society. The women and the men were kind of separated. Although you could have marriages, most men had just hung out with men all the time, and there was a lot of like homosexual activity on both sides. So the men and women would come together sometimes to impregnate, but the women had their heads shaved and they looked as much like men as possible because the ideal was the man. So women were dressed up to look exactly like men as much as they could. And they were trained to be really great warriors from birth, including the women. And there was a lot of kind of sports going on and things like that. And so it was a really strange little place. Like, it's not the same as what we have here. But every place is strange. We are strange. Every place is strange. Okay, so this is my poem, and I'll hold up my thing so I can make sort of reference to it. Okay, so has kind of a long name. It's called Triboelectrification Mimics Broad Daylight, the Stone Streets of Kingston, my misty midnight birth in spiritual witchfire illumination. With my money where my mouth is, I am talking some people into hauling 3 boats out of the water over the course of weeks. Oh, and I forgot to tell you that because of the southern connection, there's a lot of fire going on here. Like, for me being a midnight birth, there's a lot of fire. Like this fire, this descendant, which is usually a pretty small, it's where your service-oriented feelings are coming from. There's a lot of fire. So it's like this attitude toward kind of promotion and performing and poetry, but like performing poetry is really important. So there's a lot of fire set up. So I didn't want there to be a lot of water. So that's why I took the boats out of the. That's a symbol, because the boats are dry docked. It's like the ship, the people who are in charge of shipwrecks, the boats are coming out of the water here. Okay, so travel. My money where my mouth is. I'm talking some people into hauling 3 boats out of the water. Over the course of weeks, they are going to be dry docked on the Trabe. Not a real word. Okay, I'll stop annotating my poem now. Okay, with my money where my mouth is, I'm talking some people into hauling 3 boats out of the water. Over the course of weeks, are all going to be dry docked on the Trabe, and they're coming to a large warehouse to be cleaned and to make architecture for the land. 3 boats land, I'll call Triboto. Boats are beautiful and intricate when set up on stands like islands in the air or suspended in pulley mechanism. Perfectly finished with ladders to their decks, wild grasses, wayside flowers, and precious weeds growing below, or perhaps suspended from pulleys in a pulley system, Tribu from trying boating, and then deciding no boto, and setting up on the Tribotino. It's threatening to rain and storm anyway. Why tempt fate? The boats are just as nice out of the water. I would say nicer when the electrical light flashes on their shiny surfaces. I'll try it mimics broad daylight in the stone streets of Kingston. My foggy midnight Kingston birth in spiritual gloaming illumination. My aura easily seen in the friction of community. The hands are an extension of the heart, and the reach at the service of the art. Invention of my digital fingers flashes the familiar streets, a strange territory of your hometown. Anyhow, for all my talk, I speak your language enough to engage, but out of reach of following your instructions per se, and therefore sometimes though animated and engaged, mysteriously unmoved. How I am at your service, out of my own steam, and what I whimsically might want for you, willing or able to help with what my heart and hands are made to do. There is an element, for which I sit at the table talking. Oh, I agree, and the contract established in a flash of light. The I am of service in the capacity that service exists in my fond heart. Speaking myself into a recorder through the sure work day, I've painted a wrought iron twin gate, white casein, 12 or so hours before some anticipated company. My gaze spotlight trials a midnight field floodlights, focused intently, inspecting design on you, it seems to you. However, I've, like everybody else, have focus and work, plus all the talking I do. So appointment, you ask for yourself, what could I have her do for me? The thrill assignment of things do I. You walk to my twin gates, wrought iron painted white, specially depicting figures in my western horizon. Form a gate to the property where I greet you, and as initial hello, I will talk about the planets until you're ready to confuse the moon of Saturn with the moon that the cow jumpted. Wolf, snow, pink flowers, strawberries, sturgeon, moon of earth, which we call moon, until you forget why you're there. White furic wrought gates. The figure on the left is a woman securing her hat in the gusts of the wind. Oh, maybe. Hold on. Okay. Never mind. Okay, but I'd like to have a little her like holding her hat like this. Does that kind of make sense for why there's an elbow there and no arm to join those two? Anyway, no more annotation. Yes. 2 sets of twins. Okay. The furic wrought gates. The figure on the left is securing her hat in a gust of the wind. The figure on the right is absorbed in the thrill of merely existing in such a dazzling, complex realm. In lieu of fairy lights, above the gates are sailor lights, the witchfire lighting up of a green, yellow, purple, blue electrical field around the heads, because as you approach the gates, where there tends to be weather sense of how it was when I was born. And I'm already talking to you about how what you just said reminds me of an abbreviated version of a complicated, hilarious story about the past in a land found in toxic masculinity, and I laugh, describing 2 sets of twins that were born of an egg in a case of heteropaternal superfecundation, and how the 2 sisters married 2 brothers from a different family, and of who did what to whom, though I personally don't care for sports. I go on about horsemanship, boxers, patrons of the athletic arts, as if it's good stories. I talk about how I want to add an orb to the hip, to the cast iron figure on the left, and an orb on the top of the left foot of the woman, so that they can kind of look like soccer balls, but fancier, like the orb of Elizabeth Regina. Then, I talk about Argo, the Eleusinian mysteries, very, very briefly about St. Erasmus of Formia. Yes, the orb on the foot like a ball, orb on the hip, good additions. Smiling these gates, it's nice to have constant attendants who seem to be amusing themselves. It sets me a good tone. They're at your service, speaking quickly and engaging, using their hands to describe things, lol. I carry on mysteriously while the weather crackles, for these 2 gate figures to be your friends or public servants. But the secret is that to you and everyone, they're more like family, and they're in the service of the hearth, where the most important transactions and agreements sacredly meet and kept. Slate gray sky lights up broad daylight, and the air metal and plant audience, until for 3 seconds the white metal wrought iron stems sings in its heart like a filament in the stirred fire, metal molecule amorphous and moving. Wood honoring fire, the nature of the shining service cycle, to which they are servants, warming and subtly electrifying the hearts of plants in all distant lands, and the heart of the metal with the intensity of denying their ownish ferric nature to do so. Well, gates are gates. Snow moon, worm moon, pink moon, buck moon. The sapphic poet is on a star-saturated service staycation. There is a community already that's in it for the fiery presence and the reflection and electricity in their veins. And her boyfriend is a bear, so what's to be said about that anyway? And when face to face with any other mistake, any other accusing and subterfusing self, there are no words for. Solo, my rare, mysterious silence takes for who I am, lightning, and as a service to other people, is at last the goal seeked. Talking away, my dull yellow sunlight is in a gloomy and overcast wherever it was midnight here anyway. Even where the daylight of high noon at the time in the Far East, somewhere around Xinjiang, the sky was obscured and rain threatened. It turns out I climb up, having violet-green witchfire, an eternity in flashing chromoplasmish illuminated moments. I, like buckled, that drifting prehistoric stone tectonically finds itself, through natural movement, wondrously in the sky. To be of service, I have, through reading studiously, in my languorously paisley wooded blind study, have now found the nature any of the self-destroying creature in reading bones on the ground and spending time in the deserts wandering around in the heat. I learn how obviously my incredibly high expectations stop me, are out of place, and the time comes when what is there will have to do. So realized playing through is the nature of existence. And so I ally in playing imperfectly through. Sometimes the thing I so tearfully resisted that corners me. And I protect the little heart fire and keep the hearth dry here on the ground from any tiny inconsequential tears. A nice variety adventure, alternating between the mountain and water days. The Bozorbed Mountains, how to write screenplays, shy stashed far from the market here, coaxed out. The poet does it. So how to I, the one who stashes, considers. Everywhere exotic and every place, following behind everything, is a silent one, me, who will soon speak and act. But glowing out of my hands, the poet, approaching my gate, the first figure to emerge by. Air electrification feels the stemses and dense live woodses, also feeling all photobiology leaves in the dry and thunderous effect. And so that's my poem. So the picture, I think I could probably do a little better than this. I think I'd like to try doing a poem or a painting of this picture. There's some things that came up during the poem that I wanted to talk about. Oh my god. Oh yeah, how Gemini is also the, like those two were dedicated also to, that Pollux was on the Argo. Oh, they both showed up on the Argo. So they both were in the Jason story. They were shipmates of Jason in the Jason and the Argonauts, the Golden Fleece. They also were supposedly participating in the Eleusinian mysteries, famously. And so I forgot to talk about that. And they were the kind of about horsemanship, boxers, patrons of the athletic arts. And so it's not a perfect presentation here, this video, but the long and the short of it is this is the picture, and that is the pearl. And so things are going well for me. I'm working on the kitchen for my friend, and that's been really good. What else is good? Well, I have my job, which I'm working very hard at. I'm also doing some woodworking, which is nice. I am learning a lot in that context. And mostly I'm thinking about woodworking as a decorative thing. Just because it's where I think I'm most able and interested to do these things. So I'm really interested in like decorative elements on porches, which are kind of old-fashioned, or decorative elements, you know, something that's, I mean, it's kind of old-fashioned. People don't do it that much anymore. What else is going on with me? I'm writing a poem about Queen Elizabeth II, who died. And I happen to have a lot of magazines from her, from 1953, when she was inaugurated, her coronation. I happen to have 3 magazines. One of them is the London Illustrated News, and it has some beautiful advertising in it, like wonderful advertising that seems to be directly directed at the Queen, which is really sweet. And then there's a different tone, and I have a Life magazine, and I have another, I think 2 Life magazines, one before the coronation and the other one after the coronation. And so I happen to have these historical documents, and people came from all over the world because of the nature of the British Empire at the time. So there are people, there's a queen that comes from Africa who comes to the coronation. There are all these figures. The imperial family of Japan sent their son down to the coronation, up to the coronation. And he's still alive, and I think he's still the emperor, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, or maybe he isn't. Maybe he gave up his throne to his progeny. I think he did. Anyway, it's very interesting as a historical document, and I tend to be really, I mean, Queen Elizabeth, my parents, my mother, my ancestresses, my grandmother and my mother. My grandmother was super fond of the Queen, my grandmother on my mother's side. My mother was extremely fond of the royal family. So it kind of felt to me when she died that my matriarch's matriarch had died, or something like that. I felt like, plus I have a lot of English, Irish, Scottish blood, French Canadian blood, and Anishinaabeg. So there's a lot of, I mean, the story, you can come from the story at kind of a lot of different angles. So it's sort of kind of an ancestry thing that I'm thinking about this. I'm writing a poem and I'm looking at her chart also, her astrological chart, because that's what I do. And I'm thinking of doing a picture, and I'm doing a poem also about cows, and there's an interesting connection between Queen Elizabeth II and cows, because she was a really avid breeder of cows, and some of her cows won prizes. And when she died, there was a very heartfelt message from the uh, the agricultural society that she was part of, who considered her a very fine breeder of cows. So there's this cow connection, and there are pictures of her with cows, a lot of pictures of her with cows. And she has Tauran stuff going on. So she's kind of like a cow queen. And I'm kind of like, I've got lots of cow stuff going on, which is why I'm writing a poem about cows. And I like cows a lot, and I'm a vegan. And Queen Elizabeth, actually, I should save this for the video, but anyway, that I make about that poem. But she she made an announcement, I think in 2016 or something, that she was supporting the declaration that animals are sentient beings, which is a beautiful thing for her to have done. I think it was really touching to me, especially because she was so connected to dogs and horses, and as were Castor and Pollux. So anyway, it all comes around full circle. So things are going well with me. I briefly, for about a minute, 90 seconds, went to the rib test. So that was really fun. And the summer's been really fun. Like there have been a lot of great times that I've had, and the students are back in great numbers, which I love to see. I really like them, and I interact with them quite a bit in my job. And they're funny, they're charming and funny, and they're good conversationalists, and they're silly. And I usually get them when they're having a very good time and they're drunk. And so anyway, there they are lined up outside of stages. And I mean, it's beautiful in a way. They're together, and a lot of them will meet their husband or wife or significant other or partner, or best friend or mentor, or future students, or not their future students, future mentees, teachers. They'll be teachers to one another. So, I mean, it's beautiful to see how a little tiny moment in time, like 20 years, can produce a whole person that has thoughts of their own. It's just a brief flash in the pan, and all of a sudden this person's walking around with all these thoughts. And they're charming, charming thoughts. So anyway, the students are back, which is nice. So, yes, poetry. Poetry. How important is poetry now to the modern age? Well, kind of important to me, for one. So that's what I have to say. And probably important to you all too. Y'all like poetry. Poetry and astrology, which is something that everybody loves. And so, you know, these are the skills I have. And I can paint somehow, you know, a little bit. So if I paint and do poetry and astrology somehow, you know, how does that triangulate? I ask you. Seems to be, like if you're a service-oriented person with a poetry, like a Homer, kind of. Not that I'm as good as Homer, because I have nothing on Homer. Homer could talk for hours. Homer could recite something verbatim, you know, for hours and hours and hours. And I am far from that. I have to read it off of I haven't memorized any of this stuff. If I stood in Market Square reciting poetry from heart for hours, that would be something like Homer. And incidentally, you have to have quite a mind to do that. Like Cicero used what was called the Palace method, where he pictured this palace, a mind palace. And that's mentioned in the Sherlock Holmes book. What's his name? The mind palace. He goes to his mind palace. Cicero had that. And basically, it's the house, the palace. It's easier to use your own house, I find, if you want to memorize something. And then you picture yourself walking from room to room in specific order, and you place items in the room that are based on what you want to remember. So that all you have to do is picture in your mind you walking around and looking at the items that you placed in your mind palace, so that you can remember the order of the things that you want to say. That's how he did. That's how he talked for hours. Also, Terence McKenna, who I learned that from, he could talk for hours too. I guess I can talk for hours, but there's no guarantee what I'm going to talk about next. Anyway, I hope you guys are having a wonderful day. I'm thinking about you. I'm thinking about poetry. I'm thinking about how maybe some people would want to have poetry written about them. Similar to how I would write a poem about Queen Elizabeth II. Or I would write a poem about myself and make a little picture of that. Maybe you all would like to have a picture of your descendant or something, or your midheaven, or your ascendant. I mean, you couldn't order it. I mean, the thing is, most people's charts have interesting bits, you know. I mean, every part of my astrological chart is interesting to me. You guys have really interesting parts of your chart. I've noticed that when I look at a chart, there's a part of it that I like the best. So I'd kind of want to do a picture of that, whatever part of the chart that I like the best. Like, for instance, in Einstein's chart, he wanted me to do a picture of his Mars, or specifically of his ascendant or something. I'd be like, no, Einstein, I'm going to do a picture of your midheaven, because that's where all your great stuff is going on with Pisces, as I said in the poem before. You know, I'd say no to Einstein. I'd say, Einstein, please reconsider. Let's reconsider that. Let's do a chart. Let's do a poem about something else. Let me tell you. So I'd like to do poetry about people. Not people, but their charts, you know, because the person is interesting, but I can't really know the person, and I don't pretend to know about the person. I only pretend to know about the chart. And the chart is interesting. And not everyone likes poetry, but not everyone likes, to be told what to do, but they want a description of the planets, and I could talk about what's going on in the most interesting part of their chart. And it can be anonymous, even. Like, they don't want their chart to be talked about. I mean, anyway, just so many wondrous things that go through my mind as I'm sitting at my desk, looking at my globe. Isn't this a nice idea? I found this. It was gifted to me by the universe. Anyway, I hope you guys are having a wonderful day. I'm about to go to work, and I hope you have a great day today. I hope all kinds of good things happen for you. If you want sunshine, I hope you get sunshine. If you want rain, I hope you get rain where you are. If you want a fast-moving evening where you go out and you have fun and you go to a restaurant and you ride around in taxis to your friends' houses and pick up your friends and go to the McDonald's drive-thru and then take a taxi to Gananoque or Napanee and go out on the town, and then in the middle of the night you need another taxi to take you home. If you want that kind of night, I hope you have that kind of night. If you want a night where you stay in, maybe you take a taxi to the store in the middle of the night to get, some chocolate bars or something. Or you hire someone to go and get a chocolate bar at the store for you. We can make that happen. There's always someone there to make something happen for you. Anyway, this has been a very long video, so I guess I should sign off, even though I haven't naturally come to the moment where things would come to a conclusion. I feel I could continue talking, but I'm not going to. Okay, all the best. I hope you have a wonderful night. I hope all your dreams come true. I hope you've enjoyed this poetry and all the talking and my minor artwork. And I wish you all the best. And lots of love.